Silent Hill is no stranger to having disturbing characters. Silent Hill 4 had a deranged serial killer as the main villain of the game, and the hellish world he traps his victims in is enough to spook any player. And what I like about Walter Sullivan is that he isn't evil for the sake of being evil. He was abandoned by his parents at birth and was raised in an orphanage that was being run by a cult. The same cult that was responsible for the events in Silent Hill 1 and 3. The cult influenced and corrupted the mind of Walter and showed him a ritual that would reunite him with his mother. But this wasn't the case. The cult lied to him and only told him it would only reunite him with his mother because it would motivate him to carry out the ritual. However, Walter was so corrupted that he truly believed that Room 302 was his mother. This story alone is enough to make Walter one of the most terrifying villains in the franchise. Other than Walter, who else? Well, Claudia's pretty spooky. She doesn't wear any shoes and has no eyebrows.
I've come to witness the beginning.
Shut your stinking mouth, bitch!
Vincent is pretty twisted, but he's not a character that left enough impact. Probably due to the fact that he wasn't necessarily a villain, though he did try to manipulate Heather into killing for him. But this scene between Heather and Vincent is terrifying, and it's definitely a scene that stuck with a lot of people.
Don't stand there looking so smug. You're the worst person in this room. You come here and enjoy spilling their blood and listening to them cry out. You feel excited when you step on them and snuff out their lives.
Are you talking about the monsters?
Monsters? They look like monsters to you? Don't worry. It's just a joke.
He says he's joking, and he could very well be, but we all know that everything in Silent Hill is unique to each person. And also, Vincent obviously is a person we can't trust. So it does leave you pondering over whether or not he was actually trying to mess with you or not. But for me personally, there is one character in the franchise that I find truly terrifying. It's a character that makes you question the very man you control. And it's a character that subtly reveals the truth that James is hiding from.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head, pow.
This is Eddie Dombrowski, not a villain, but a victim of Silent Hill. Why do I think Eddie is terrifying? Well, it's mainly due to how Team Silent introduced him and how they use writing, cinematography, environmental design, and the use of Akira Yamaoka's music to plant seeds into the player's mind. Should you trust him? Is he dangerous? Is he completely harmless? Why is Eddie here? James has his own reason for being in Silent Hill, though that very reason already raises a lot of questions. James came to Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his deceased wife, who has been dead for 3 years. Even James thinks the whole thing is ridiculous, but despite that, he came anyway, probably because he's clinging on to the hope of seeing his wife once again. This leads us into believing that James is a good person. We see him as the hero of the game. As we venture through the town, we quickly discover that it's filled with grotesque monsters, and some of the roads are destroyed, making it impossible to reach the park. So we have to cut through the Blue Creek apartments, and it's in this building we run into Pyramid Head. Whatever this thing is, it slowly pursues James throughout the game. As we continue through this creepy building, we will eventually enter this room. And our ears are filled with a disgusting noise. The music is unsettling and keeps the tension up. As we move around this room, we will discover this. It's a body shoved inside a fridge, like someone's trying to hide it. Interacting with it, James wonders who could have possibly done this. The noise coming from the bathroom may give us some answers. We open the door and we see a man hunched over a toilet, vomiting. He takes a look over his shoulder and looks right at James. But watch his eyes. He instantly looks away, avoiding eye contact. Avoiding eye contact is usually a sign of guilt or they're trying to hide something. This is something James did in a previous cutscene with Angela. When Angela asks James who he's looking for, he avoids eye contact and even places his hand over his face.
Who is it?
Someone very important to me. I'd do anything if I could be with her again.
Me too. I'm looking for my mama. I mean my mother.
Most likely trying to muster words together because he doesn't want to tell a stranger that he's there looking for his wife that died 3 years ago.
It wasn't me. I didn't do it.
Eddie immediately starts pleading innocence, even before James has even spoken a word. He claims he was like this when he got here. He's obviously talking about the body in the fridge. This is already suspect enough, but maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt since there are bodies we can find throughout Silent Hill. But James asks him, who's the dead guy in the fridge anyway? Eddie still persists to say he had nothing to do with it. It may be the reason why he's in the bathroom and being sick. It's possibly due to shock. James asks Eddie if he's friends with the Red Pyramid thing. It's an odd question, but James and Eddie are in an odd situation, and are both probably very confused. Eddie responds and says he has no idea what James is talking about, but also claims he's been seeing some weird looking monsters. Maybe the very monsters we've been seeing. Eddie says to James that he's not even from this town. James relates to him in a way, saying that something brought him here too.
You too, huh? Something just brought you here, right?
Yeah, you could say that.
Before James leaves, Eddie turns to him and goes to tell him something, but hesitates,
You be careful too.
and just tells him to be careful. Though this interaction is friendly but awkward, players may walk away from this feeling conflicted. Did Eddie do this, or was it the monsters? Well, there are other signs that give the player a message. For example, the camera angles of the cutscene. Throughout most of the cutscene, the camera hangs over both James and Eddie. James stands tall over Eddie, which is a camera trick to give off the sense of dominance over someone else, in this case over Eddie. Eddie is incredibly vulnerable here. He has his back completely exposed to a stranger in a potentially dangerous scenario. It shows the audience signs of weakness. And James standing tall over Eddie reinforces that. Even the dialogue.
It wasn't me. I didn't do it.
Do what?
I didn't do anything. I swear. He was like this when I got here.
Eddie pleads innocence to a crime that no one's accusing him of. This gives off the sense of desperation. So far, this cutscene does make Eddie look weak and vulnerable, and even kind of pathetic. Maybe he is innocent, but the body did look like someone was trying to hide it, in a fridge of all places. Next door to Eddie, you can actually find a room with a bunch of high detail images to look at. On the wall, you can find beauty posters and football posters, and even a football on the floor. You can also see these stickers that say Club Inflexible Person. Now, if you understand the lore of Silent Hill, you will know why this room exists and the messages it's trying to say. But the fact this room is right beside Eddie, I'm sure you can piece together what this room means. But there is one more thing to take note of during this cutscene, and that's the music. The music in the background is called Ordinary Vanity, and it starts off kind of peaceful and somewhat sympathetic, but it quickly transitions into something that sounds kind of evil. Akira Yamaoka's music is supposed to evoke emotions in the player. The soundtrack alone in this game could be considered as another character. It's a vital part of the games. The main emotions that Akira wants to evoke is sadness and fear, but the music isn't just background noise, it's her message. During the scary parts of the game, the music can get a bit crazy, to the point where it doesn't even sound like music, it's just noise. In the examples I'm about to show, you will notice a very common sound. Take a listen. The sounds of banging, specifically banging on metal. This is a message to the player that there is danger nearby or right in front of them. This most commonly happens in areas where monsters are nearby, but it can also happen in some of the most oppressive areas in the game, like the hospital and prison section for example. The ambient music there is telling you that this place you're in is very dangerous. Now back to Eddie. As the music transitions, you will eventually hear this.
I didn't do it. I swear I didn't kill anybody.
You're not friends with that.
The sounds of banging. This is the game sending a message. Eddie may seem harmless, but there is something sinister going on. This entire encounter plants a seed into the player's mind. Is Eddie dangerous or not? Once you have left the apartments, you will eventually run to a woman, who oddly enough looks like James's wife, but her name is Maria. This confuses James a lot, and even says to her that they could be twins. But Maria reassures him that he's confusing her with someone else. How odd. Maria tags along with us, and we stumble upon an abandoned bowling alley. Once we're inside, we are greeted with this cutscene.
So
Eddie is with Laura, and the
Robbery?
conversation
Murder?
just makes Eddie look that
Nah,
more suspicious.
Nothing like that.
Huh! You're just a gutless fatso.
What'd you have to say that for?
I thought you said the cops were after you.
No, I just ran because I was scared. I don't know what the cops are doing.
But if you did something bad, why don't you just say you're sorry? Well, I guess I run away a lot too.
It's no good. They wouldn't listen. Nobody will ever forgive me.
Laura is questioning him on what he's done and why he's run away from the cops, but Eddie just says he hasn't done anything bad and just brushes it off. He says he has no idea what the cops are doing, he only ran away because he was scared. The music in this section is unlike anything we hear in the game, besides the music in Heaven's Night. The music is very upbeat and catchy. It's a complete stark difference to the music we heard in the previous cutscene with Eddie. Before we talk to Eddie, it's probably best to address the elephant in the room. Yes, Eddie somehow has a pizza, no, 2 pizzas, in a town that's completely been overrun by monsters, and this bowling alley is clearly abandoned. This cutscene is probably the most bizarre one in the franchise, and has been memed on quite a lot. Just listen to the dialogue.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
She said she was fine by herself. She said a fatso like me would just slow her down.
Forget you.
Fun fact, even Guy Seehey, the voice actor of James, thought this entire scene was ridiculous and even suggested to the devs that they should change some lines.
The directors, they knew what they wanted. They let us argue or challenge, well, me, some of the lines that I wasn't comfortable saying. But ultimately, if they really wanted it, they got it. Like the dog ending was one that they definitely wanted. I was against doing that, as many of you know. And I thought the line about eating pizza and monsters was a little silly at the time, but turns out it's a fan favorite, so it shows you what I know.
Actually, that leads into the next question.
As an actor, I can understand why you would think something like this is ridiculous and even out of place for a game like Silent Hill. He's not wrong, but from a player's perspective, I think this entire scene was done on purpose. It's supposed to be ridiculous, it's not meant to be taken seriously at all, because it fits Eddie's character. But notice the camera angles again in this cutscene. Eddie once again is sitting down and James is standing over him, with even some of the camera shots overhanging them both again. It's yet again trying to give off the sense of dominance. Eddie is yet again exposing his back to a stranger and is too distracted with the pizza. Whilst James berates him for it, it's again shown to us that Eddie is weak and lazy. It's the game trying to tell us that Eddie's not a threat to James. This scene may possibly remove that seed from your mind that Eddie is a dangerous person, and it may even make you forget about your last encounter with Eddie. But the thing is, the whole scene with the pizza is a trick. It leads players into a false sense of security. Obviously, you're in a town full of monsters, so there's no security in that, but at least you can ease your mind from potentially running into someone that's dangerous, right? The next section of the game takes place inside the Brookhaven Hospital, and it's where we eventually catch up with Laura. and it's where she contradicts James's monologue at the beginning of the game.
I was friends with Mary. We met at the hospital. It was last year.
James tells us that Mary died 3 years ago,
Mary died of that damn disease 3 years ago.
but Laura tells James that she became friends with Mary last year. James shouts lie at Laura and says it's not possible because last year Mary was already... But before he finishes his sentence, he pauses. Either he's thinking to himself, or he doesn't want to tell Laura that Mary is dead. Either way, this part of the game tells us that James is an unreliable narrator. Before we leave the hospital, we are chased by Pyramid Head, and it's where Maria gets killed. This leaves James devastated, and as we leave the hospital, James says this to himself. Mary, what should I do? Are you really waiting for me somewhere? Or is this your way of taking... And he stops. He doesn't finish his sentence. This is where James starts becoming incredibly suspicious. Before leaving the hospital, this message was left for James. He who is not bold enough to be stared at from across the abyss is not bold enough to stare into it himself. The truth can only be learned by marching forward. So we march forward and come across this dark hole in the wall. The stairs down feels endless, and reaching the end, we somehow find ourselves inside some sort of prison. This place feels like it shouldn't exist, and as to why James is down here, well, someone may give us some answers. We jump down this pit and find ourselves in a dark hall, and music is incredibly unsettling. James looks around with his flashlight and sees something he wasn't expecting.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head, pow.
James asks Eddie if he killed him.
You killed him?
Eddie immediately says it wasn't his fault.
He made me do it.
Calm down, Eddie. Tell me what happened.
That guy, he had it coming. I didn't do anything. He just came after me. Besides, he was making fun of me with his eyes, like that other one.
But it's this line that reveals Eddie's true colours. Besides, he was making fun of me with his eyes, just like that other one. Is Eddie talking about the person in the fridge? Or has he killed someone else entirely?
Like that other
James
one.
ridicules
Just
Eddie
for
for his
that, you
actions,
killed him?
and this sets Eddie off.
What do you mean just for that?
Eddie, you can't just kill someone because of the way they looked at you.
Oh yeah? Why not? Till now I always let people walk all over me. Just like that stupid dog. He had it coming too.
Eddie?
For the first time, we see Eddie stand. This causes James to stand back. This visibly shakes him. Eddie and James are now on the same level. This time, James doesn't look dominant and somewhat looks scared. Eddie is not the same person here. This could be the real Eddie that he was hiding from James. The eye contact in this cutscene is very important because we can clearly see in Eddie's eyes that he's lost it. The eye animations were a really important part of Eddie's character, as it was done on purpose to show to the player that Eddie is deranged.
Eye direction is another direction. And his eyes move a little fast compared to other characters. I did that on purpose.
Even James's eye animations here are done perfectly. This part here, we can clearly see James looking down at Eddie's gun, but quickly brings his eyes back up to match with Eddie's. James is probably worried for his own life here, since Eddie is incredibly unpredictable at this point. Just moments ago, he was eating pizza all to himself, without a care in the world, and James ridiculed him for it. It showed to us that Eddie is weak and harmless, and may even plant a seed into the player's mind that Eddie isn't capable of killing.
Eddie?
I was just joking, James.
After Eddie lets out all of his frustrations, he then proceeds to tell James he was just joking, which in itself is a bit twisted. But you can clearly see in his face that this was just another lie. Just like the first time we met Eddie, he avoided eye contact before he started to plead innocence. And now, he's avoiding eye contact after he just said it was all a joke. He's lying, but notice how he never took his eyes off James during his venting. Eddie remained eye contact because he wasn't lying this time. Eddie eventually leaves, and leaves us with a lot of questions. But not just questions about Eddie, but also for James. The place we're in is clearly a prison, and down here it's filled with evil and danger. This is probably the most oppressive area in the entire game, and the music reinforces that. It's not even music at this point, it's just noise. Specifically loud banging and metallic noises, which we all know is a message of danger. But the question is, if Eddie's down here, then why is James here? The whole scene with the pizza is what makes this cutscene even more terrifying, because we saw two very different Eddies. But we don't know which one is the real Eddie, since he's obviously a liar. We can inspect the body, and James spots several bullet holes. Eddie killed this man, and most likely killed the person back at the apartments. However, we were never sure up until this point, because of the way Eddie has been written. It makes the player feel conflicted about him, not sure whether or not he's innocent, and when you finally get your answer, it's terrifying. Because Eddie could have always been like this. All the town has corrupted him so much that it pushed him to his boiling point, and now he's down here with us, carrying a gun. The whole prison section is very oppressive, and we see James jump down many holes. It's clearly symbolic to James' descent into madness, and it's where players may start to realise that it seems like this whole journey for James has been a punishment for something he's done. We've been given hints leading up to this point in the game, and it seems like James isn't as innocent as someone like Eddie. And now we're stuck down here with him. At the end of the labyrinth section, we can find this graveyard. You can't read most of the tombstones, but there's this 3 in the corner that we can read. We can find the tombstones of Angela, Eddie, and even James. The graves are empty, but this is a sign that whatever these characters have done, they all deserve equal punishment. It isn't long before we run to Eddie one last time, and this time we find him in a room with multiple bodies, and this time he's completely lost the plot.
What does it look like? He always busted my balls. You fat, disgusting piece of shit. You make me sick. Fat ass, you're nothing but a waste of skin. You're so ugly, even your mama don't love you. Well, maybe he was right. Maybe I am nothing but a fat, disgusting piece of shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead.
And the corpse can't laugh.
In this cutscene, he isn't just venting, he's letting out all of his pent up rage. The camera angles constantly shift, just making Eddie's next move that more unpredictable. One detail that's worth pointing out in this cutscene is the music. In the last cutscene, the sounds of banging were completely absent, and so far it's also been absent here as well, not until Eddie finishes his last sentence before walking away.
If he makes fun of me, I'll kill him! Just like that.
Eddie, have you gone nuts?
You hear the sounds of wind chimes, a very subtle message to the player that there's about to be danger. For some odd reason, James felt the need to ask Eddie if he's gone nuts, and this pushes Eddie completely over the edge. He turns to us and accuses James of laughing at him.
Hey, I didn't mean anything.
Don't bother. I understand. You've been laughing at me all along, haven't you? Ever since we first met.
Eddie proceeds to then shoot James, which unfortunately transitions into a pretty lifeless boss fight. It only takes just a few shots to cause him to flee, which gives us an opportunity to look at the bodies of Eddie's victims a bit closer. You will notice that all the bodies look like James. You can't see the face all that much, but they're all wearing the same clothes. And this wasn't a reused asset, it was completely intentional. In fact, every body James sees is his own. This doesn't necessarily mean they aren't real. It's just what James sees. Everything James sees in Silent Hill is unique to him. When we run into Angela and save her from this monster, we see it as a disgusting creature, but Angela sees it as her father. Eddie probably sees ordinary people, but they're all laughing at him, which caused him to have a psychotic breakdown. Which we do have to put an end to. Entering the next room, Eddie has a lot to say, and it completely makes you rethink about James as a whole.
When you're hated, picked on, spit on, just because of the way you look, after you've been laughed at your whole friggin' life. That's why I ran away after I killed the dog. Ran away like a scared little girl. Yeah, I killed that dog. It was fun. It tried to chew its own guts out. Finally died all curled up in a ball. Then he came after me. I shot him too, right in the leg. He cried more than the dog.
Eddie explains the reason why he came to Silent Hill. He killed a dog and shot the owner. The person he shot was a football player, most likely someone from his school, or maybe even someone he played on the same team as Eddie. The room beside Eddie at the very beginning explains a lot now. It had football posters all over the wall and even potential messages about Eddie's insecurities.
He's gonna have a hard time playing football on what's left of that knee.
You think it's okay to kill people? You need help, Eddie.
Don't get all holy on me, James. This town called you too. You and me are the same. We're not like other people. Don't you know that?
What Eddie implies here is that him and James are there for the same reasons. They've both done something terrible, and now they're paying for it. The town called Eddie because of what he did. However, we only know that James is here because he received a letter from his dead wife, who apparently died 3 years ago.
You and me are the same. We're not like other people. Don't you know that? Let's party!
Unfortunately, Eddie's boss fight is probably the worst in the franchise simply because how goofy it looks. But the music in the background is extremely aggressive and it's definitely fitting for this fight, because now we see Eddie for what he is and the music just enhances all that pent up rage he's been holding in. Silent Hill broke Eddie. It consumed him and made him give in to his bloodlust. And now James is forced to kill him.
Eddie? Eddie? I killed a human being. A human being.
Carrying out this act of self-defense, it clearly shakes James. You can tell in his voice he feels guilty for what he had to do, but it was either him or Eddie. James looks over Eddie's lifeless body and processes what he had just done, but as James repeats this to himself,
a human being.
It's almost like the feeling of taking someone's life feels familiar to him.
Mary. Did you really die 3 years ago?
We finally escape the prison, and outside it's very ominous. We take the boat across the lake to get to the final section of the game, and I think this segment is brilliant, simply because we have time to process everything we have been through up until this point in the game. We reconsider everything we know about James as a person, and we are slowly becoming aware that James is not a hero in this story. He's hiding something dark from us. And now, we fear what we might discover. This is why I loved Eddie as a character, because he challenges what you think about James. It makes you question him on a deeper level. It makes you think about the horrors that James may have committed and why he's here in the first place. Eddie makes the player face the possibility that James is hiding a lot from the player, and that everything we know is a lie. Walter Sullivan may be the scariest villain in the franchise, because of the horrible murders he committed and the power he holds over his victims. But the difference between Walter and Eddie is that Eddie isn't a villain, he was just another victim of Silent Hill. Eddie's character psychologically messes with the player and leads him into a false sense of security. He's a character that opens the player's mind about James, the person who we thought was the hero of the story. Most of the horror that comes from Walter is mostly from shock value and the corrupted world that he traps the player in. But the horror that comes from Eddie plays with your mind. James is not a good person. Mary did not die 3 years ago. She most likely died a few days ago, but it wasn't due to her sickness. James murdered her. He took her life out of selflessness. He felt like she was a burden to him, and she was taking away his life. James loved her, but the sickness didn't just consume Mary, it was also consuming James. He lied to himself that he did it out of mercy, but the reality is he did it for himself, and now he's stuck in Silent Hill, paying for his sins. Pyramid Head was created for James's desire to be punished, but he doesn't know this until much later in the game. James became so delusional for what he did, and he kept lying to himself. The purpose of Pyramid Head was to force James to confront his sins, but since we took Eddie's life, James is now carrying the guilt of killing 2 people, hence why we see 2 Pyramid Heads at the end of the game. Eddie, in my opinion, is the character that exposes players to the truth about James, and for that reason, this is why I think Eddie Dombrowski is the most terrifying character in Silent Hill.